Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The cold night air bit at his skin, but nothing could distract him from the sight before him. On the crowded streets of the city, where the gleam of luxury, cars reflected off the wet pavement, a figure stood out like a sore thumb, her clothes ragged, her shoes barely holding together. She stood there, unaware of the glances passing over her, staring down at a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." Her face, pale and thin, carried the weight of a life that had been lost to the harsh realities of the world. As he walked past, Lucas Hill, the millionaire CEO of Hill Industries, didn't stop. He never did. But something about her stopped him in his tracks. Her eyes, dull and tired, caught his gaze for a moment, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him that he couldn't explain. It was as if everything around him blurred out, and all that remained was the intensity of her silent plea. He kept walking, his hand instinctively reaching for his wallet as if on autopilot, preparing to throw some money into her cup. But something inside him hesitated. His world, the world of high-rise buildings, fine dining, and endless meetings, had never allowed room for such pauses. He didn't have time for this. But the thought lingered. What if he stopped? What if he just listened? For the first time, he realized how out of touch his life had become with the struggles of others. The thought was unsettling, and he tried to shake it off. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. The image of the woman on the street, that brief moment of connection, haunted him. He was a man who had everything: wealth, status, power. And yet, in that moment, he had never felt so empty. By morning, he had made up his mind. It was ridiculous, it didn't make sense, but he needed to do something. He didn't know what, but he couldn't ignore the pull. He called his assistant and asked her to find out everything she could about the woman. Her name was Sarah, he learned. Sarah Jennings, a homeless woman living on the streets of the city for months. He didn't know what he expected, but by the end of the week, he found himself in a small, dingy shelter where Sarah was said to spend her nights. He had no plan, no idea what he was doing, but something urged him forward. The first time they spoke was in that shelter, a place that smelled of desperation and broken dreams. Sarah looked at him with cautious eyes as he approached her, unsure of his intentions. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice hoarse. There was no warmth, no recognition, just cold, hard truth in her words. "I know," Lucas replied, feeling out of place in the dimly lit room. "I just wanted to talk." She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at him as if trying to figure him out. Finally, she spoke again. "Why are you here?" Her voice was softer now, though still guarded. He had no answer, no good reason, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. "I don't know," he said, his words feeling hollow. "I just felt like I needed to know you, to understand." Her eyes softened, but there was no warmth. No pity, no anger, just a kind of exhaustion, as if she had seen too many people like him come and go, people who were only there because they thought they could fix something, people who were only interested in a charity case. "I'm not a project," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You can't fix me, just like you can't fix this world." The words stung, but Lucas didn't flinch. He had heard worse from the people who surrounded him in his world of wealth and power. But this was different. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't impressed by his title, his money, or his fame. And for some strange reason, that made him want to know her more. Days passed, and Lucas found himself returning to the shelter, not because he wanted to help, but because something inside him was drawn to Sarah. Each time, she was colder, more distant. She wouldn't let him in, wouldn't let him get too close. But each time, something inside him broke a little more. Something inside him was drawn further into her struggle. It wasn't long before the whispers started. People around him, his colleagues, friends, and even his family began to notice the shift in him. They noticed his growing obsession with the woman who had no place in his world. His business partner, Greg, was the first to comment on it. "You're doing what?" Greg asked, his voice incredulous. "You're spending time with her? A homeless woman? Are you out of your mind?" But Lucas didn't care. He didn't care about the judgment, the ridicule. Something was changing inside him, something he couldn't ignore. And then, one night, everything changed. Lucas was standing in front of the shelter when he saw her. She was standing there again, just like the first time, her cardboard sign in hand. But this time, she wasn't looking down at the pavement. This time, her eyes were searching for something, or someone. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world around them faded away, and all that remained was the connection between them. Without thinking, Lucas crossed the street and stood in front of her. "You're here again," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. There was no anger, no defiance, just curiosity. "I don't know why," Lucas admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to be here." Sarah didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she handed him the sign. "Maybe you can help." The words hung in the air between them. Maybe you can help. The question was simple, but the weight of it was immense. Lucas took the sign, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't about giving money or donations or solving problems. It was about understanding, about listening, about being part of something bigger than himself. In that moment, Lucas realized that nothing in his life had prepared him for what was about to happen. Nothing in his world of power and wealth had prepared him for the emotional journey that would come next. The world would laugh at him. They would mock him. But what mattered now, what was at stake, was something deeper, something that could not be measured by the success of his business or the size of his bank account. As the night grew colder, Lucas held onto that cardboard sign, and for the first time he felt something stir within him that he had long forgotten, the need to truly connect, to break down the barriers that separated him from the rest of the world. And as Sarah disappeared into the shadows of the city, Lucas couldn't help but wonder, what if everything he had built, everything he thought mattered, was a lie? The morning. After their brief exchange, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The moment he'd spent with Sarah lingered in his mind, echoing in the hollow spaces of his heart. He had told himself it was just a fleeting encounter, a moment of weakness, a lapse in his otherwise controlled life. But deep inside, Lucas knew this was different. He had always been a man of certainty. His world was predictable. His success had been carefully engineered, and his wealth had come with a price that he had willingly paid. But standing in front of Sarah the night before, his comfortable, controlled reality had crumbled. There was something about her, something raw and real, that unsettled him. As the day wore on, Lucas tried to focus on his work. He sat through countless meetings, reviewed financial reports, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet, in the back of his mind, Sarah's image refused to leave. The quiet strength in her eyes, the way she stood unflinching. In a world that had abandoned her, haunted him, that night, unable to sleep, he found himself outside the shelter again. The same familiar streets, the same familiar sign, "Anything helps." But this time, something was different. The sign was gone, and there was no trace of Sarah. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked closer, scanning the area for any sign of her, looking for someone. A voice startled him, and Lucas turned to see a woman in her late 40s, her face lined with the hard years of life on the streets. She was holding a cup, asking for change, just like so many others. "Sarah Jennings?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she sized him up. She knew who he was, everyone did, Lucas Hill, the millionaire businessman, the CEO of a company that had shaped the city's skyline. "She's gone," the woman said, her tone flat. "You won't find her here." "Gone," Lucas repeated, a sinking feeling in his stomach. "She left the shelter this morning," the woman explained, shrugging. "Said she had somewhere to go. No one knows where." Lucas didn't know why he felt so unsettled. After all, why would he care about a woman like Sarah? He had everything he needed: wealth, power, influence. But something about her had gotten under his skin. And now she was gone, disappearing into the night like a shadow. He spent the next few days searching for her. He visited the shelter, talked to people in the area, even asked around at local businesses, but no one had seen Sarah. Since that night, it was as if she had vanished off the face of the earth. The more he searched, the more he realized that finding her wasn't just a matter of curiosity. It was an obsession. Lucas couldn't help but wonder why he felt so compelled to find her. She was just another face in a city full of faces, people who had fallen through the cracks, forgotten by a society that only cared about success, about power, about money. Yet Sarah wasn't like the others. There was something about her that made Lucas feel like he needed to understand her story, to know what had brought her to this place of despair. Days turned into weeks, and his obsession grew. He couldn't focus on his work, and the people around him began to notice. His partner, Greg, ever the voice of reason, confronted him one evening. "Lucas, you've been distracted," Greg said, leaning across the conference table, his tone laced with concern. "This whole thing with Sarah? What are you doing? You've got a company to run. You've got responsibilities. You can't afford to get lost in some emotional mess." Lucas didn't answer right away. He looked at his partner, trying to process Greg's words. On the surface, Greg was right. His company was at a critical juncture. Negotiations with potential investors were on the line, and his personal life, as empty as it was, required his attention. But there was something in Lucas's chest that refused to let go of the idea of Sarah. "I know," Lucas said finally, his voice strained, "but something about her, I can't stop thinking about her. There's something real there, Greg, something I don't understand." Greg sighed and shook his head. "She's a homeless woman, Lucas. She's got her own problems. You can't fix everyone. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." But Lucas wasn't listening. As the days passed, his obsession only grew. He couldn't understand why he couldn't let go, why the image of Sarah's tired, resigned face haunted him so relentlessly. Then, just when he was beginning to think that maybe he was losing his mind, he got a call. It wasn't from Sarah, but it was from someone who might know her. The call came from an unknown number, and at first Lucas hesitated, but curiosity won over. Lucas Hill. The voice on the other end of the line was a man's, rough and gruff. "I've got information on Sarah Jennings." His heart skipped a beat. "I don't know where she is," the man continued, "but I know who you're looking for. Meet me at the diner on 5th and Oak in an hour. Don't bring anyone." The call ended abruptly, and Lucas sat in stunned silence. For a moment he debated whether he should go. Was it a trap? Was this someone trying to take advantage of his wealth? He had no idea. But something inside him told him that this was the lead he had been waiting for. An hour later, Lucas found himself sitting in a small, run-down diner, staring into the cup of coffee in front of him. The place was nearly empty. The only sound, the hum of the refrigerator and the low murmur of the television. He looked at the clock on the wall. The man should be here any minute. Finally, the door opened, and in walked a man Lucas didn't recognize. His face was weathered, eyes dark and hollow, as if life had taken everything from him. He sat down across from Lucas without a word. "You have information about Sarah?" Lucas asked, leaning forward. The man nodded slowly, his gaze flicking around the diner nervously. I know where she is, but it's not a place you're going to want to find." Lucas's heart raced. He had expected this to be just another dead end, another person with some half-baked story. But the man's words held weight. This wasn't just idle gossip. This was something serious. "Where is she?" Lucas asked, his voice low and urgent. The man hesitated, looking around the room before he spoke again. "Sarah's been involved in something big, something dangerous. It's not just her anymore. There's more to her story than you can imagine. If you're really serious about finding her, you need to be ready for what's coming." "What are you talking about?" Lucas pressed. "What do you mean?" But before the man could respond, the door to the diner opened again, and a rush of cold air swept into the room. Lucas turned, expecting to see another customer, but instead he saw the face that had haunted him for weeks. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock as she saw Lucas sitting at the table. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. For the first time since they had met, Sarah's walls came down. She was vulnerable, afraid, and Lucas realized in that moment that whatever had drawn him to her, whatever he had been seeking, was much bigger than he had ever anticipated. The tension in the diner thickened as if the very air between them was charged with electricity. Lucas's heart raced as he watched Sarah take a step forward into the room, her eyes flicking nervously between him and the man across the table. The man's face had gone pale at the sight of her, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the cup of coffee in front of him. "What's going on, Sarah?" Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper, the confusion in his chest now bubbling into something much stronger. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. The silence between them stretched out, thickening as the man across the table shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I never wanted you to get involved," Sarah said finally, her voice raw with emotion. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I never asked for any of this." Lucas's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What's going on, Sarah?" The man across from them coughed roughly, as though trying to clear his throat. "Maybe it's time you knew," he muttered under his breath, before standing up abruptly. "But I'm not sticking around for this. You'll have to finish the story without me." He turned quickly and left the diner, his long coat swishing behind him as he disappeared into the night. Lucas didn't have time to react before Sarah spoke again. "Wait!" Lucas called after the man. But it was too late. He was already gone. The diner door swung closed with a jarring slam, and Lucas turned back to Sarah. Her gaze was focused on the space between them, avoiding his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had just transpired hung heavily in the air, and Lucas could feel his chest tighten as he waited for Sarah to explain. She took another deep breath before finally speaking, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm not just a homeless woman, Lucas. I'm not what you think I am. I'm part of something much bigger." Lucas didn't know what to say. He had expected answers, something that would finally make sense of all the confusion. But this was something else entirely. "What do you mean by something bigger?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah hesitated before replying. "I've been running from a dangerous group of people who, well, they've been after me for a long time, and they're not the kind of people you want to get involved with." Her words hit Lucas like a blow to the chest. This wasn't just a homeless woman struggling to survive. This was a woman with a past, one that was dark, secretive, and full of danger, and somehow he had been pulled into it without even knowing. "Who are they?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. Sarah shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't say. They'll come for me and they'll come for anyone I tell. I can't risk it." "Sarah," Lucas said urgently, "you're not alone in this anymore. I can help you. I'm not afraid of whatever you're running from. We'll face it together." But Sarah only looked at him, her face drawn with weariness. "You don't understand, Lucas. It's too dangerous. They'll destroy everything you've built, everything you care about." The words struck Lucas to the core. He had worked so hard to build his empire, to rise above the world he had been born into. Everything he had worked for could be shattered in an instant if he crossed the wrong people. But even so, he couldn't walk away from Sarah. There was something in her eyes, something that told him this was the moment that would change everything for him. "I'm not backing down," he said firmly, his voice steady. "If this is your fight, then it's my fight too. I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone." Sarah looked at him for a long time, as though weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not worth it," she said, her eyes dark with guilt. "I'm just a broken woman, lost in this world. You don't need this burden, Lucas. You don't need me." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You're not a burden, and you're not alone. I won't let you go through this by yourself." A tear slid down Sarah's cheek as she squeezed his hand. "I don't deserve you," she said, her voice barely audible. "You deserve more than you know," Lucas replied, his voice low and filled with conviction. "We'll figure this out together." For a moment, there was silence. The weight of their shared understanding hung in the air, and it was in that moment that Lucas realized just how much he had changed. He had come into this world of power and money, thinking that he could buy everything he wanted, that he could control everything around him. But standing here, in this small diner, with this woman who had nothing, he realized that there were some things that couldn't be bought. There were some things that required more than money. They required trust, courage, and something deeper. "I don't know how to fix this," Sarah said after a long pause. "But I'll tell you everything I know. Maybe together we can figure it out." Lucas nodded. "Start from the beginning." Sarah looked around the empty diner one last time before she began her story. "I used to be a regular person," she started, her voice quiet but steady. "I had a life, a job, a future. I wasn't always like this." She paused for a moment, her gaze distant as though she was reliving the memories. "But then, I met him." Lucas felt a chill run through him. He didn't know who he was, but he had a sinking feeling that whoever this person was, they were the key to everything. "His name was Ethan," Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper. "He was charming, persuasive. He seemed like the kind of person I could trust. He promised me a future. He promised me everything." Her hands clenched into fists as she continued. "But he wasn't who he said he was. He was part of an underground organization, a group that does things, unspeakable things, things that would make your skin crawl." Lucas's stomach turned. He had suspected as much. The way Sarah had acted, the way she had avoided answering his questions. It all made sense now. She wasn't just running from a difficult past. She was running from something dangerous, something she had been involved in. And now, somehow, Lucas was caught in the web. "They found out about me," Sarah said, her eyes dark with fear. "And they've been after me ever since. Ethan, he was my link to them. He told me things I should never have known." "What kind of things?" Lucas asked, his voice tense with anticipation. Sarah hesitated, looking at him with a mix of fear and regret. "I can't tell you everything, but they want something I have, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but Lucas still didn't understand the full picture. Who were these people? What did they want with Sarah? And most importantly, what did he have to do with it? "You don't have to explain everything. Right now," Lucas said, his mind racing with questions. "We'll figure it out. But I need you to trust me. We need to stick together, Sarah. We're stronger together." Sarah looked at him, her expression softening for the first time. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "But I don't have anyone else. I don't know where to go from here." "Then we'll figure it out," Lucas said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone anymore." The days after Sarah's revelation passed in a blur of uncertainty. The danger that she had spoken of hung over them both like a dark cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. Every time the phone rang or the doorbell rang, Lucas's heart skipped a beat, fearing that someone would be standing on the other side, ready to drag them into a nightmare they weren't prepared for. Sarah, on the other hand, had grown more withdrawn, her anxiety growing as each day passed. The fear that had once been just a shadow in the back of her mind now gripped her every waking moment. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, especially not someone like Lucas, who had lived a life so far removed from hers. But Lucas wasn't going anywhere. He had made up his mind. He would help her, no matter the cost. That night, as they sat in the small apartment Lucas had rented for them, Sarah stared out the window, her eyes distant, lost in thought. The apartment was small, furnished with the bare essentials. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. They couldn't risk drawing attention to themselves. They couldn't afford to let anyone know where they were. Lucas paced back and forth across the room, his mind racing. He had contacted his top security team, hoping to get a lead on the people Sarah was running from. But the more they dug, the more elusive the group became. Whoever they were experts at staying hidden, leaving no trace. It was as if they had no past, no history. They were a ghost, and they were after Sarah. "Sarah, we need to make a plan," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can't keep hiding forever. We have to confront this." Sarah turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time in hours. Her eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and there was a heaviness in them that Lucas had never seen before. For a moment, she just looked at him, as if she were trying to decide whether to trust him completely. "Confront them?" she asked, her voice hollow. "You don't understand, Lucas. They'll kill us. It's not as simple as confronting them. They're everywhere and they know how to get to us." "I don't care about that," Lucas said, his jaw clenched. "I won't let them hurt you, Sarah. We'll fight back." Her gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Lucas couldn't ignore. She didn't believe him. She didn't believe that he could protect her, that he could save her from the shadows that followed her. "They've been after me for too long," Sarah whispered. "I'm too deep in this, Lucas. There's no getting out. You're just a part of the game now." The words stung, but Lucas didn't back down. "If I'm in, then I'm all in," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll fight this together, Sarah. We'll figure out who they are, and we'll make them stop." She shook her head slowly, her lips trembling as if she were about to cry. "I don't know if we can stop them," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know if anyone can." Lucas reached out to her, taking her hand in his. "We can," he said firmly. "We'll stop them together. But we need to act fast. We need to get ahead of them before they come for us." The decision was made. The next morning, Lucas called in a meeting with his security team. They had already begun investigating the mysterious group that Sarah had been involved with, and Lucas wasn't willing to wait any longer for answers. He wanted to know who they were, what they wanted, and how to take them down. As the team gathered around the conference table, Lucas laid out everything they knew about the situation. Sarah sat quietly beside him, her eyes downcast, her fingers tightly clutching her coffee mug. "We don't have a lot to go on," Lucas began, his voice calm but urgent. "But we know one thing. This group is dangerous. They're ruthless, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." The team members nodded, their faces grim. They had all seen the threats before, but something about this situation felt different. The fact that Sarah had been running from them for so long made it clear that they were dealing with something far beyond a simple criminal operation. This was personal, and whatever they were after, it wasn't just money. "Have we found any leads?" Lucas pressed. One of the team members, a man named Carl, spoke up. "We've traced some of the transactions linked to Sarah's past, but they're all fake. No real names, no addresses. They've erased all traces of themselves. We're dealing with people who are experts at covering their tracks." "Which means they could be anywhere," Lucas said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "And that makes it harder to know how to stop them. We need to get to the source. We need to find out who's behind this." "We're working on it," Carl assured him. "But it's going to take time." Sarah sat silently, her face pale as she listened to the conversation. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She had never wanted to drag anyone into her mess, but now there was no way out. "We don't have time," Lucas said, his voice hardening. "Every minute we waste, they get closer. We need to move faster. I don't care how much money it takes. I need information." His words were harsh, but Sarah could hear the desperation in his voice. For the first time, she saw just how far he was willing to go. He wasn't just a businessman trying to protect his interests anymore. He was someone who cared about her, who would do whatever it took to keep her safe. And that scared her. She had never relied on anyone before. She had always been on her own, fighting to survive in a world that had long abandoned her. But now, with Lucas by her side, everything was changing. He was willing to risk everything for her, and she didn't know if she could allow that. "We can't keep running forever," Lucas continued. "We have to make a stand. We need to find out who's behind this and stop them before they have a chance to destroy us." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was to come. Sarah knew that Lucas was right. The longer they waited, the more dangerous this situation would become. They had no choice but to fight back. "I'll do whatever it takes," Lucas said, his eyes locked on Sarah's. "We'll get through this. Together." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes still filled with doubt. She didn't know if they could win. She didn't know if they could survive the storm that was coming. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Lucas's security team worked around the clock, following every lead they could find. They dug deeper into the mysterious group that had been chasing Sarah, but every time they thought they were getting close to something, the trail went cold. It wasn't until they received an anonymous tip that the pieces finally started to fall into place. The tip was a set of coordinates, an address. It wasn't much, but it was a lead, and it was enough to give them hope. "We have a location," Carl said, holding up a piece of paper with the address written on it. "It's in the outskirts of the city. It's a warehouse." Lucas stood up, his eyes burning with determination. "We're going there, now." Sarah, who had been sitting quietly, looked up in shock. "What? You can't be serious. It's a trap. They'll be waiting for us." "We're not walking in blindly," Lucas said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll go in prepared. We'll take them by surprise." For a brief moment, Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to put Lucas in danger. She didn't want to drag him further into this nightmare. But she knew that this was their only chance. They couldn't keep hiding. They had to take a stand. "We'll go together," Lucas said, his hand on her shoulder. "I'm not leaving. You were doing this." And so, with the final pieces of the puzzle in place, they set out for the warehouse. Lucas had his security team on high alert, and they moved cautiously through the shadows, prepared for anything. As they approached the location, the adrenaline surged through Sarah's veins. She had no idea what awaited them inside the warehouse, but she knew that this was it. The moment they had been waiting for. The moment they would either sink or swim. But as they neared the door, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she realized something. The shadows weren't just following her anymore. They were following them both. The sound of footsteps echoed in the narrow alleyway outside the warehouse, each step seemingly louder than the last, as Sarah, Lucas, and his security team neared their destination. The cold night air pressed against their skin, but it was the tension in the air that made the atmosphere feel suffocating. Lucas's heart pounded as he glanced over at Sarah, who was walking beside him, her face pale and her expression unreadable. She looked like she was about to say something, but the words never came. Instead, her eyes remained fixed ahead, her mind clearly preoccupied with the looming danger. "We stick to the plan," Lucas said, his voice low but firm. He had been briefed by his team, and they had covered every possible angle. But no plan could fully account for the unpredictability of the group they were up against. They were dealing with an enemy who knew how to cover their tracks, who knew how to strike when least expected, and that was what made them so dangerous. "We'll get in, get what we need, and get out," Lucas continued, his eyes scanning the area. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette standing out against the dim glow of the streetlights. There was no sign of movement, no indication that anyone was inside. But Lucas knew better than to let his guard down. "We'll be ready," Carl, one of Lucas's top security experts, said from behind them. His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the edge of caution in it. They had no idea what they were walking into. "I'm not so sure about this," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's too quiet. It feels like they're waiting. And for us—" "We'll take it slow," Lucas said, his tone reassuring. "We're not walking in blind. We'll have the element of surprise on our side." Sarah nodded, but it was clear that she didn't share his confidence. She had been running from these people for months, had spent countless nights looking over her shoulder, always expecting them to show up when she least expected it. Now she was standing on the precipice of a confrontation that could change everything. As they approached the large metal door of the warehouse, Lucas motioned for his team to spread out. The plan was simple. Lucas and Sarah would go in first, followed by Carl and the others, all armed and ready. They would clear the area, find out who was behind the operation, and take them down. Lucas turned to Sarah, meeting her gaze. "Stay close. Don't go off on your own." She didn't answer, but he could see the conflicted look in her eyes. She was scared of the group that had been hunting her for so long, and of what they might do to Lucas now that he was involved. She had never wanted this for him. She had never wanted to drag him into the chaos of her life, but it was too late for that. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. "Let's go," Lucas said, pushing open the metal door just enough to slip inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature inside the warehouse seemed to drop several degrees. The air smelled stale, thick with dust and decay, but Lucas barely noticed it. His focus was entirely on the task at hand. They moved silently through the dark space, their footsteps muffled by the worn concrete floor. The shadows stretched long in the dim light, making it difficult to see clearly. But Lucas wasn't concerned with the darkness. He had been in places like this before, dangerous places, where every corner hid a threat. "Do you think we're going to find them here?" Sarah asked, her voice low and cautious. "I don't know," Lucas replied, his voice steady, "but we'll find answers. We're not leaving until we know who's behind all of this." They reached the center of the warehouse, where large metal crates were stacked high, some toppled over from disuse. The space felt eerily empty, as if it had been abandoned for years. But Lucas knew better. The people they were after were experts at hiding in plain sight. They wouldn't leave the warehouse unguarded. Just as Lucas was about to give a signal to his team to start searching the area, a sharp noise pierced the silence. A metallic clang that echoed from the far end of the warehouse. It was followed by a low, guttural laugh. Lucas froze, his instincts immediately going on high alert. He signaled for Sarah to stay behind him as his team positioned themselves around the room, weapons drawn and ready. "I told you it was a trap," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with fear. "We're not backing down," Lucas said, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows. "Stay close, we're not alone." The laughter grew louder, more unsettling. It was followed by a voice, deep and menacing, that echoed from the shadows. "You really thought you could find us?" The voice chuckled darkly, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. "You're in over your head, Lucas Hill." Lucas tensed at the mention of his name. Whoever this was, they had been expecting him. They had been tracking him, watching his every move. And that made them all the more dangerous. "Come out and face us," Lucas shouted into the darkness, his voice cold and commanding. "I'm not here to play games. Show yourself." For a moment, there was only silence. And then, slowly, figures began to emerge from the shadows, one by one. The first man stepped into the light, his face covered by a dark mask. He was tall, muscular, and moved with the kind of confidence that only came from years of training. Lucas's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man's posture, the way he held himself like a soldier, ready for battle. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long, Sarah," the man said, his voice calm but full of menace. "And now you've brought a billionaire into our world. How quaint." Sarah stiffened at the sound of her name, her body tense as she stepped back slightly. But Lucas remained rooted in place, refusing to show any sign of fear. "We're not afraid of you," Lucas said, his voice steady. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight." The man smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "You think you can take us down? You're nothing but a pawn in this, Lucas. You've been a part of this story since the beginning. You just didn't know it." "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, her voice rising with a mix of confusion and anger. "What do you mean, I've been a part of this?" The man laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "You were always part of the plan, Sarah. You just didn't realize it, and now it's too late." Before Lucas could respond, a loud crash sounded behind them. His security team quickly turned, weapons raised, but it was too late. The entire warehouse seemed to come alive with movement. Figures emerged from every corner, surrounding them. Lucas's mind raced as he realized that they had walked right into a trap, one that had been carefully laid for them. There was no escape now. Sarah's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "We need to get out of here," she hissed. "They'll kill us if we stay." But it was already too late. The warehouse doors slammed shut, locking them in. Lucas turned to face her, his mind racing. "We're not running, we're fighting back." But even as he spoke, the sound of footsteps grew louder, and he knew they had no time left. The battle was about to begin. The warehouse was plunged into darkness as the last door slammed shut behind them. Lucas's heart raced in his chest, his mind working overtime to process everything that was happening. The cold metallic scent of the warehouse hung thick in the air, and the quiet hum of tension was almost suffocating. They were surrounded. There was no escape. Sarah stood close by, her hand gripping Lucas's arm, her face pale and tense. She had been through so much more than anyone could imagine, and yet here they were, standing at the edge of everything they had fought for. The man who had been leading them in circles for so long stepped forward, his dark eyes gleaming. Under the mask that covered his face, he stood tall and imposing, his presence commanding, as though he were in complete control of the situation. But the look in his eyes told Lucas that this was not just about power. It was personal. "You really thought you could take us down, didn't you?" the man said, his voice low, filled with disdain. "You were always just a pawn in this game, Lucas. You and Sarah both. Your paths were meant to cross. It was inevitable." Lucas's mind spun. He had known from the beginning that this was going to be dangerous, but he had never anticipated this, the sense of inevitability in the man's words. It was as if the entire course of his life had been a lie, a game manipulated by forces far beyond his control. He had thought he was in control, thought he had all the power. But here, in this dark warehouse surrounded by shadows, he felt small, vulnerable. "What game are you playing?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling but fierce. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "We don't want anything from you, Sarah. You were never meant to be more than a tool, a pawn. And Lucas, well, he was just another piece we needed to move, a way to get to you, to see if he could be of use." Lucas clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He could feel the anger building inside him, the frustration, the helplessness of everything he had gone through, everything he had risked, for this one moment. "You've been using me?" Lucas asked, his voice low and dangerous. "This whole time, I was just a part of your plan." The man nodded, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You were never more than that, Lucas. Never. You think you're the hero of this story? You're just a small part of a much bigger game. A game that doesn't care about your wealth, your power, your success. It's about control. It's about survival." Lucas couldn't take it anymore. He took a step forward, ready to face this man who had destroyed everything he thought he knew about the world. "You don't get it," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "I'm not just going to stand here and let you destroy everything I care about. I'll fight you until the end." The man's expression remained cold. "You're already too late," he said. "The pieces are already in motion. There's no stopping this now." As he spoke, the sound of footsteps filled the room. More figures appeared out of the darkness, shadows moving swiftly to surround them. They were trapped, caught, in the very web they had been trying to escape. Sarah turned to Lucas, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here now," she whispered urgently. "They're not going to stop. We'll never make it." But Lucas wasn't listening. His mind was focused on one thing, one person, the man in front of him, the one who had been pulling the strings, who had led him here. Lucas wasn't just going to walk away. Not this time. With a sudden movement, Lucas lunged at the man, his hands outstretched, desperate to take him down. But before he could make contact, a sharp pain shot through his side. He staggered, the world tilting as he fell to his knees. His vision blurred as he looked down to see blood soaking his shirt, the pain radiating through his body. Sarah screamed, rushing to his side. "No! Lucas! Get up!" The man who had been taunting them stepped forward, a gun now in his hand. He stood over Lucas, his face cold and emotionless. "This is the end, Lucas. This is where your story ends." But Sarah wasn't going to let it end this way, not after everything they had been through. She grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, her hands trembling with adrenaline as she swung it with all her strength at the man's legs. The force of the blow knocked him off balance, and he stumbled backward, dropping the gun. Sarah grabbed it, her hands shaking but determined. She aimed it at the man, her breath coming in short gasps. "Don't you dare think you've won," she spat, her voice cold with fury. "We're not your pawns." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't even understand, do you? You're nothing more than a puppet, Sarah, and now the strings are being pulled." Just as the man lunged toward her, Carl, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his weapon drawn and aimed at the man's chest. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," Carl said, his voice firm as he pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed through the warehouse, and the man collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The remaining figures in the shadows froze, unsure of what to do next. "Get the rest of them!" Carl shouted to his team, and they moved quickly, subduing the remaining members of the group. But the tension in the room still hung thick, the fear and uncertainty not yet dissipating. Sarah collapsed beside Lucas, her face pale as she pressed her hands against his wound. "Hold on, Lucas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't leave me. Lucas could barely focus, his vision flickering in and out of focus. He could hear her voice, the sound of her words drifting in and out of his consciousness, but the pain was overwhelming. His life was slipping away, and he knew it. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to get hurt." But Lucas shook his head weakly, his voice barely audible. "You don't have to apologize," he whispered. "I chose this. I chose you." And with that, he closed his eyes, his hand slipping from hers. The world felt like it was collapsing around Sarah. She had just watched the man she loved, the man who had risked everything for her, slip away. She hadn't even realized how deep her feelings for him had run until it was too late. Now, all that was left was the sound of her heart breaking. She stayed by his side, her hand on his chest, praying for a miracle. But as the minutes ticked by, it felt like there was no hope left. The battle was over, but it had come at a devastating cost. Then, as if by some miracle, Lucas gasped, just a shallow breath. But it was enough. His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered hoarsely, his voice weak but full of resolve. "I promised. I'm staying." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she clutched his hand, refusing to let go. They had both been through hell, and they had both nearly lost everything. But somehow, they had made it out alive. The silence that followed wasn't just the end of the battle. It was the beginning of something new, something they couldn't have predicted. They had been brought together by fate, by a series of twists and turns neither of them could have anticipated. And now they would rebuild, starting with the most important thing they had left, each other. Epilogue. Months later, Sarah and Lucas stood together on the balcony of a small apartment overlooking the city skyline. The chaos of the past was behind them, but the scars remained. They had both learned things about themselves they never expected. The world was never the same once they knew the truth. But they had fought together and survived. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow. Across the city, Lucas took Sarah's hand, looking out at the horizon. "We're finally free," he said softly, his voice filled with a sense of peace. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the city, her thoughts a million miles away. "We're free," she echoed. But it was more than just freedom they had gained. They had found each other, and in the end, that was worth more than anything else. The end